We're now going to talk about fonts and working with fonts on the web and for your website. Fonts have always been a bit of an issue when you're working on the web because you have to make sure that the user has the fonts that you want to use on your website on their system. Even way back when the web was first starting, it was possible to try and embed fonts into web pages. And I did go through that process for a client when I was first working on the web. And it was a lot of work. It required a couple of different programs for the different operating systems. And by the time I went through all of that, the web pages were very big and we didn't have fast internet back then. But the main issue with embedding fonts on a page was always that the fonts would end up a little bit fuzzy. So I was able to get for the client their specific font onto their web pages, but they weren't crisp and clear. And that was the major issue. So we ended up coming up with different fonts for the website than for their print work. We've come a little ways since then with regards to fonts, but it's still a bit of an issue. And I have the Adobe Type website open only because I want to show you. Notice there's a Find Fonts button. And fonts are listed alphabetically, by style, by theme. There's all kinds of fonts available for you. But do you want to use those fonts? Number one, because they will add to your page size. Number two, they may be unable to be licensed for the web. Licensing of fonts is a big issue. Now this Adobe Type service is a service and you pay for it. Along with that payment comes part of licensing the fonts for your own use. Another area where you can get fonts is on the Adobe website based on the font finder. So this looks like, oh cool, I can go out and get a brush font and I select the category here and it shows me all kinds of different options. I can do handwritten and here's a few more options. The issue is not can you find the font. The issue is how much is it going to cost you to use it or license that font, and is it licensable at all? Now there are a couple of ways you can deal with those types of issues, but licensing is still a concern. Anytime you're going to use a font, you go out and find a free font on the web. Just because you can download it doesn't give you the right to use it, especially if it's a commercial website. You must make sure to look over the proper licensing, and in that licensing, it will determine if you have access to using it and where. Maybe you can only use it for print. You can't use it out on the web. So here's an example of some Google fonts. Google has some services, and we'll take a look at that later. But we also have this Font Squirrel as a website, and that has some free fonts available as well. But wherever you decide to get your fonts, it's so crucial to make sure that you have the license to use those. Notice on Font Squirrel here, just to show you an example, these little icons here on the left-hand side underneath the name of the font, what that does is tell you where it's possible to use it. Not necessarily that you have the license to use it, but the type of device that it's possible to use it for. And any of these with the little globe does mean the internet. But never assume when you're working with fonts that you have the rights to use those any way you wish just because you can download it. So we're going to take a look at working with some of these different fonts, and specifically the Google fonts and Font Squirrel fonts, and how to install them. There is also, in addition to the Adobe Type piece, there is a Typekit piece available. That's another paid service where you can download and license fonts. And there are quite a few of them in addition to those. I'm just naming a few. But I just want to make you aware, when you're working with fonts on the web, you do have access to other fonts that you can store on your web server. to make sure that the user is always viewing the same font and you're not dependent upon the user system containing those fonts. The font world is opening up to us on the website. We just have to be very careful and knowledgeable about how to use it to make sure we're not out of any licensing rights. And as long as you pay attention to that, we can have some fun with our fonts on the web. So just a brief overview about licensing and web fonts to use for your own web pages.